Welcome back everybody to another episode on the channel. Thank you all for tuning in to yet another one. Today's episode, guys, we're filming in the garage because we just can't seem to get out of this rain. It has been raining like crazy here, and I'm ready for the rain to be gone because can't really get out and do a lot of filming. I mean, sure, it doesn't bother me to fish in the rain, but it definitely, it sucks filming out in the rain. But today, we're gonna be talking about one of my favorite techniques to actually talk about because we're already catching them off of frogs already. We're catching bass off of frogs already here in Wisconsin, and I'm super jazzed about it, and it's only gonna get better. The summertime is a great time to frog. So today, we're gonna go over everything that you need to know about frog fishing. So we're gonna go over different types of frogs, modifications to do to the frogs, rod, reel, line, everything you need to know about frog fishing. But before we jump into today's episode, guys, is actually sponsored by Super K Jigs. Super K, I got them on the wall back here, guys. Super K Jigs, if you've never heard of Super K Jigs, guys, they are a jig company here out of Wisconsin, and all of their jigs are hand-tied jigs. So every single jig that you get, and they also make spinner baits, they make terminal tackle as well. They do a lot of different things, and they do custom jigs as well. So if there's a custom pattern or hook size that you want on your jig, you just email them in what you need, and they'll get it all set up for you guys. So if you love jig fishing, especially myself, I fish a lot of swim jigs, guys, and hand-tied jigs are they're so much better. They're so much better than rubber banded jigs. So if you guys love fishing jigs or terminal tackle, spinner baits, things like that, guys, I would highly recommend checking out Super K Jigs. I'll link them down below in the description. Also, if you go over to Super K and you check them out and you want to order something, use the code WW20. It'll save you guys 20% off your order. So use that code WW20. I'll leave it down in the description as well. But if you use that code over at Super K, it'll save you guys 20% off of your order with Super K. So if you're looking for new jigs, new terminal tackle, spinner baits, things like that, guys, I'd highly recommend go checking them out. Also, really quick before we jump into it, guys, if you love tips and tricks videos, out on the water action, just everything about fishing in general, guys, we do it all here on the channel. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and hit that little bell notification so you never miss when we upload a new video. So like I said, guys, we're talking about frog fishing. Now, I have a box basically just packed full of frogs, guys. I frog fish a ton. I love frog fishing. I probably got like, I don't know, way too many, like $400 to $500 worth of just frogs alone, because I just love fishing frogs. They're one of my favorite lures to fish. And out here on the Mississippi River, there's a lot of pike in the mix too, so you kind of go through a lot of frogs in general. But frog fishing, guys, is one of my favorite techniques. I love fishing frogs. Now, first off, let's talk about why frog fishing is such a great technique, especially in the summertime, and even right now even. A lot of times in the river systems around here especially, or just in lakes in general, those fish either move deep or they move up shallow underneath cover. Now, vegetation, lily pads, matted vegetation, things like that, duckweed, they carry a lot of oxygen, and fish love to get up underneath them because in the summertime it gets really, really hot. So they want to get as cool as they can. They're getting up in the shade. And that's where, throwing, a topwater frog is basically your only option if you're going to target them up shallow in that vegetation and things like that. It's really your only option to get in there. Otherwise, you got to punch mats. But frogging is a heck of a lot. It's way more fun than punching, in my opinion. But so you have, that's really where it capitalizes. There's really no other lure in the summertime that does it better than a frog up shallow in that duckweed vegetation and things like that. When it comes to frogs, we're looking at basically two types of frogs. So you have your traditional frog, which basically, you just have your pointed nose on there. And then you have your popping frog. So you guys can see that this lip on here is cupped. So what this does, and why, we'll start with the popping frog and why I like it so much. Now, earlier in the season when you don't quite have all that vegetation built up yet, but there's still vegetation, and maybe you're fishing lily pads and there's open pockets of water in between the lily pads, that's when I like using a popping frog. And the reason being is in between those lily pads and such, or in between those pockets of vegetation, this is going to stir up the water. It's going to spit water when you're popping this along, and it's going to stir it up, and it's going to really make a lot of commotion to the fish, and let them know that this is in the area. So when there's not a lot of vegetation, when there's vegetation but it's kind of sporadic, that's when, or especially lily pads, that's when I'm fishing a popping frog. But then when it gets, really, the heat of the summer and it's hot, super hot and it's just thick matted vegetation or duckweed everywhere, that's where I switch it up to one of these. The reason why you don't want to keep going with the popping frog is this is gonna get a bunch of gunk and matted vegetation and things like that caught up on it, and it's just not gonna come through the water that well. This, on the other hand, will pull right over top of all that, and it really does a really good job at coming through thick matted vegetation, especially duckweed and stuff. But the frog bite is absolutely amazing in the summertime, and basically, like I said, it just comes down to 2 frogs, and that's what I use. Now, when it comes to color, let's go over color, because this is a big one that a lot of people get hung up on. Now, for me, I really like to keep it simple when I'm talking to beginners and stuff. I say go with a white frog and go with a black frog. If you're looking to buy a couple frogs and you just want a couple to cover all your bases, go with the black one. Like this is an all black one, and then a white one. Now the reason being is on like those sunnier days, I tend to use the white one, and on the cloudy days I like to use a black one because it silhouettes in the water a little bit better. But that's pretty much the 2 colors I think you should go with if you're just looking to get 2 colors. A lot of people pay attention to what the frog looks like on the top. It doesn't matter what the frog looks like on the top. That's not what the bass is gonna see. Another color that I will say that I really like to use a lot of the time, guys, is actually this one right here. This is from Spro. Spro frogs are my favorite frogs to use. I just think they hold up really well. They are more pricey for frog fishing, but I really like Spro frogs. But this color right here, a little bit of chartreuse and white on the bottom, I just think that this frog, for some reason, it's one of my favorite colors. I think it's like rainforest or something it's called, but it works really well. I don't know if that chartreuse gets them, but this is one of my top favorite colors. But I do use white and black a ton. I pretty much, like the one season, I only used a black frog for the most part. But there's a lot of different colors out there, a lot of different variations. I've used this color quite a bit as well. It's just like this silver color. You really can't go wrong. I really feel like it really just comes down to the action. And if you're getting a frog coming across a hungry bass, they're gonna eat it. Now, let's talk about modifications that you can do to your frog. So, fresh out of the package, this is a brand new Spro frog. As you guys can see, these legs are pretty long. They're not as long as Spro used to send them. So a lot of times what I like to do is flip the bait over and see how long they are. I like to keep the legs like roughly the length of the frog, which these ones are pretty darn close. They're right there. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll trim it up. I'll trim up the legs, or what I like to do is trim one leg shorter than the other. So I'll clip this one here. Now with one leg being shorter than the other, what that does is when you are popping the frog with your rod tip, it's going to walk the dog. So you're gonna get that walk the dog action a lot easier. So you can still do it with the longer legs, but if you cut one shorter than the other, it'll actually help you walk the dog with the frog better. I've actually seen guys take the legs completely off of their frogs, especially if you notice that you're getting short struck by bass. I would shorten up these legs a little bit. It's gonna help up your hookup ratio. Now, the second modification that I make to frogs is I like to take a pliers and bend out the hooks. So you'll see that these hooks are sitting kind of towards the top of the frog there. Now what I like to do, like I said, is I take a pliers, and what I'll do is I'll bend those hooks up and out just a little bit. You don't want to go too far, otherwise they are going to get caught up in vegetation. But I like to bend them up and out just a little bit because it's going to help up with your hookup ratio. I think it was like Ish Monroe who won I think he won a tournament here on the Mississippi River, and he was talking about frog fishing because on the Mississippi River, frog fishing is huge. And he's talking about how on a good day of frog fishing, you're 70% on your hookup ratio, and on a great day of frog fishing, you're 80%. So you're never gonna be, and I think that's very accurate, you're never gonna be like super hooking up with every single fish with frog fishing. It is a little tougher, but you know, shortening up the legs and bending out the hooks are really the two big modifications that you can make to improve your hookup ratio. Now let's talk about setup, because setup is something that not a lot of people look into, and it's definitely a big one. It's not as easy as just picking up a frog and then tossing it on whatever rod and going. The biggest thing that you need to focus on is your rod, in my opinion. Now right here, I have an Akuma, the Tournament Series rods, the TCS, they're the Tournament Concept Series rod, and this is a 7.3 heavy fast action rod. I really like this rod. Now it is a little pricier. For this rod right here, you're looking at, I think it's like 150 bucks roughly for this rod right here. But the biggest thing you want to look for is a heavy action. Now I prefer a little bit longer, a 7.3 heavy fast action. The reason why you want a heavy action rod, now this is important because a heavy action rod is really what's going to help you drive the hooks on those frogs. those hooks on these frogs are pretty darn big. You need a stout rod that has the backbone to drive those hooks through the fish's mouth. Now, you want a longer rod and the heavy rod because you need that backbone, because when you set the hook with this rod, you need to be able to get the fish up and out of all that vegetation, because the longer that fish gets, into that vegetation, the higher chance of them coming off. So with a heavy action rod, you're going to be able to get that fish up and out of the water. You're going to be able to get them on top of that vegetation and pull them to you. I've frogged with a medium heavy, and you can still frog with a medium heavy fast action rod. That's what I used to do when I didn't have a heavy action, and it worked. But I definitely have a way better hookup ratio with a heavy fast action rod. I really like the Okuma tournament concept. It's super, super light, and that's what I really like about it, because when you're frogging all day long with a big heavy action rod, a nice, a little more expensive one that's a lot lighter, it just makes that whole day of frogging a lot more pleasant, because it's not such a huge rod or so heavy in your hand. So I really like this rod. This rod is just an absolute tank when it comes to frogging. Now let's talk about reels. So I use this is the Okuma Saros reel. Now the big thing with reels when it comes to frog fishing is getting the fastest reel you can get. So this is a 7-3-1. I frog with a 7-3-1, and this reel I absolutely love for frogging. You want something fast, because like I said before, when you set the hook on that fish, you want to be able to get them up and out of that water as quick as you can and to you. You want a fast reel because you want to pick up that slack, you want to pick up that line, and you want to be able to get them up and over to you as quick as you can without them getting into all that vegetation. So if you're fishing with like a 5-3-1, something like that, it's just not ideal. I would say go with a 7-1-1 at least. At least go with a 7-1-1. This is a 7-3-1. I think it works really, really well. I love this reel. But if you can go with like an 8-1-1 or the fastest reel you have, that's what I would use for frog fishing. Because like I said, you want to be able to get that fish out of that vegetation as quick as you can. Let's talk about line. Let's talk about line, guys. This is a big one. What line do you use? I would recommend going with 50-pound braid. Okay, that's what I use, is 50-pound braid. And the reason why I use 50-pound braid is because around here, 50-pound braid is plenty strong to basically catch fish on a frog. Another reason why I like 50-pound braid is the diameter of the line. You could fit a lot more braid on your spool than you can if you go to 60 or 70 pound. I used to fish, I think I used 70 pound once, and it takes up a lot on the spool. 50 pound, you get a lot more line on the spool, and with a frog, you're making long casts sometimes. Sometimes you're really bombing that frog out there, so it's really nice to have that extra line on there for those longer casts, especially if you're retying and things like that as well that we don't account for. But 50 pound I think is plenty enough. Now if you're fishing like Florida, something with really thick stuff, you might want to beef it up, but I think 50 pound is a great all-around line. You also want to use braid. People ask about fluorocarbon sometimes, and I will say that braid, the reason why you're using braid is because when you're frogging, sometimes your line gets up underneath lily pads or under vegetation, and when you set the hook with braid, this stuff will cut right through the vegetation. Check it out. The next time you catch a fish off of a frog, look at that vegetation. I bet you there's going to be a line from, like, there's going to be cut vegetation from your braid when you set the hook on there. So 50 pound I think is your best all-around braid for frog fishing. So to wrap this up, let's talk about how you fish a frog. So fishing a frog, guys, a lot of times it really is just, nothing's gonna beat time on the water. Getting out there and fishing a frog is super important. You need to get out on the water and put your time in out there on the water to see how it is. But a lot of times, summertime, guys, I throw a frog out there and I just keep popping my rod tip and bringing it back to the boat, just walking the dog consistently. I don't stop it. Sometimes if I see a little wake or something like that from the fish, I'll slow it down or stop it for a second, something like that. You can do a cadence with it if you want. You can give it a couple pops, let it sit, or you can pop it 3 times and let it sit. A lot of times, like I said, I'm just bringing it back to the boat, walking the dog. I don't stop it at all, but that's just how I do it. Now, if you see a bass come up and hit your frog and he misses it, you notice that the frog's still there, don't just let it sit still, okay? That bass is still in the area. A lot of times people kill it and they don't move it. Well, after that fish tries to strike the frog, they lose where the frog is. So if you notice that they miss the frog, give it a couple more pops to let the fish know, like, hey, you didn't get, they didn't get the frog. And a lot of times when you pop it a couple more times, you'll get that follow-up bite, I guarantee it. So I'm getting super excited just talking about it, thinking about catching a fish off of a frog, because I love frog fishing, guys. I think it's just amazing. So now, setting the hook on a frog fish, guys, give it some time. Like when you see the fish hit it, you don't have to set right away. A lot of times they're still working it into their mouth. Sometimes they miss it. So you don't want them to miss it and then set the hook and take it out of the strike zone. So you want to make sure they have it. So a lot of times what I like to do is encourage people when they're fishing a frog to actually be, especially beginners, is actually pop the frog back to you with your rod tip up. And the reason being is because if a fish hits it, you have to reel down your slack and then set the hook. And that usually gives the fish plenty of time to get this frog in. If you're fishing with your rod tip down low like I do, you gotta have that self-control to not set the hook and rip it out of their mouth right away. So a lot of times if I'm fishing with my rod tip low, if they hit it, I'll count to myself like 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, and then I'll set just to make sure that they have it in their mouth. I'd rather you wait a little bit longer with setting a frog, like setting the hook with a frog, than setting right away. Just because in my experience, I don't think I've ever waited too long, I guess you could say. So wait a little bit longer. But if you're a beginner, fish with, pop it back to you with the rod tip high, because then if you do go early, you still have to reel down. It gives the fish a little bit more time to get the frog in their mouth. There you guys have it. That's everything you need to know about frog fishing. If there's something that I didn't cover that you guys want me to, you have a question about, leave it down in the comments below and I can answer you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.